Hi, everyone. This is Rosemary Coates in Silicon Valley. I'm your host for this edition of the Frictionless Supply Chain podcast. I'm the executive director of the Reshoring Institute, where we help companies bring back or expand their manufacturing in the U.S. And I'm a contributing writer to Supply Chain Management Review. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Darcy MacClaren. That she's the Chief Revenue Officer at SAP Digital Supply Chain. Her work with SAP customers is in digital transformation, focusing on supply chains. She also has a particular affinity for empowering women in supply chain, but I'm going to let her tell you all about that and her work in this area. So let's get started. Welcome, Darcy.
Hello, Rosemary. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Let's start out by having you tell us a little bit about SAP. I think most people are familiar with the software, but if in case they're not, if you can describe SAP a little bit, and then SAP's digital supply chain also.
Oh, certainly. So SAP is the largest application software company in the world. Over 80% of the world's transactions go through an SAP system. And so what we provide is an intelligent enterprise where we handle, basically all the functions of an organization. And on top of that, we have a business technology platform where you can do innovation. And we have our line of business applications that sit over that, such as HCM, we have procurement, we have consumer experience. And of course, I work for the digital supply chain part of the organization. And on top of all that, we embed artificial intelligence. So I do lead the digital supply chain team for SAP globally, which is everything from designing your products, manufacturing, delivering, operating, and all the planning and scheduling for those products.
Okay, so are those applications all included in the main SAP package, or are there add-ons that you can pick and choose depending on what your business needs?
Yeah, it's very specific that you buy the solution that you need for your business. Typically, product-centric companies, those that are manufacturing things, consumer life sciences, they would buy the core, what we call ERP, and then in addition, allow the supply chain consumer experience. If you're more of a service-oriented company, you would again everybody buys the core ERP, and then depending on the industry that you're in, whether it's more consumer oriented, whether it's more oriented towards manufacturing, then you would determine which products you need based on the industry that you're in. But generally, our customers have the core ERP, and then they'll add what they need on to their solution based on the business needs.
Okay, so this is functionality that's been developed over the past, what, 10 or 15 years for specifically for supply chain. I know SAP's been around a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
SAP's been around for 50 plus years, and we've gone through several major technology transformations, which I think is a key to the testament of the success of SAP, is our ability to sense the market and go from R2, R3, S4, and now we're into Rise, and we've transforming into a cloud company. The supply chain functionality, the rudimentary functionality, has been in SAP since pretty much the beginning, but we really started with advanced functionality in supply chain in what's called APO, and then that even evolved into integrated business planning. So early on, we were very supply chain centric because we really focused on manufacturing companies, which that's really kind of an essence to it. So early on, we had it, but the evolution has been quite significant. And of course, now the what SAP will be, we think by the year 2025, and you're hearing it here, Rosemary, is the largest artificial intelligence company based on actually adoption, because we're embedding it into our solutions, and with the size and scale, that means we have the ability to bring AI embedded and usable in a pretty significant way.
So, so we've talked a lot about AI on the podcast before. Can you describe a little bit how AI is used in the digital supply chain? I mean, can you give me an example of how it would be used,
Oh,
just to
yeah,
clarify?
absolutely. First of all, the impact on AI is huge. We've done a lot of studies, such as the Oxford Economics study, that actually says that 75% of supply chain executives believe you cannot do the role unless you adopt intelligent technologies such as AI, and most of them already have this in process. So we know supply chain people recognize the importance because of the amount of disruption, the amount of data, and the complexity. You really need to use AI. So where we're seeing it is the entire supply chain that I described earlier, designed to operate. We're seeing it brought into planning, in really being able to do recommendations, in doing predictive, in really being able to analyze the solve that was done and explain to it in natural language, is explain to me what this demand planning did, and it comes back to you. We're seeing it in transportation, in automatically being able to read, a bill of ladings that are in your yard, and figuring out what I should be unloading first. It's happening in manufacturing, in really in end to end, automatically changing in a customized area the machines and the setting, and making recommendations on predictive maintenance and such. So every area of the supply chain is seeing it. What our value add is really being able to tie all these siloed organizations together and holistically look, so that when there's a disruption, so say my shipment is not coming in, or the um, contract manufacturing is down, is getting that information in, understanding what that means, self-healing and solving it, and then communicating that to who needs to know, is really the power of what SAP is offering. And I could not be more excited about seeing this technology being used and really beneficial, not only to the customers, but to, and this is going to sound very, very global, but to the whole world. Because when we want to solve a problem, and say there's a problem in the Red Sea, there's a problem with the Baltimore Harbor, is to solve that problem in the most efficient, cost efficient way that's beneficial to please the consumer, but also take into impact the carbon footprint and what that means, right? And so I think that's a very noble, bold value proposition that SAP is very serious about making sure that happens.
Yeah, I think most people recognize now that the future is all about data. Well, the present too, but all about data and being able to make decisions based on recommendations or cause and effect relationships. Really, really important. Well, how did you come about this position at SAP? Can you tell us a little bit about your background in education and how you came to work at SAP?
Well, what is interesting is the role I have now, global head of supply chain for a large global company, is what, when I was in undergrad, is what I wanted to do. Who knew, right? When I was actually not even 20 years old, or barely 20. And that's what I'm doing now. Now, the way to get there was a lot of meandering. And what I did is, right out of college, and I was an economics major at a liberal arts school, is I was recruited early on by Hewlett Packard. And Hewlett Packard, phenomenal organization, trained you in actually manufacturing and how you do quality manufacturing. And they also trained me in sales, and they trained me in actually programming. They put me through my MBA, and they gave me great coaching and mentoring from really, really good leaders. That was the foundation that got me interested into kind of the manufacturing aspect of it. My role there was, I was actually a salesperson that sold their HP 3000 and manufacturing solutions. But that was my foray into it, and I loved it. And it was why I was getting my MBA that I really loved operations research and complex problem solving. So as my career evolved in leaving Hewlett Packard, I quickly went into the software side of the house, and was recruited by a really early staged planning and scheduling organization. That was where I really got involved in linear programming and heuristics. And even as a sales professional, as a small company, you got to roll up your sleeves and really understand the modeling. And I loved it. And I would be, working with folks from craft who actually scheduled lines. They made Jello and all the decisions. And I really just loved it. And I love building and scaling organizations. So my career in that really followed in what the ERP companies at the time weren't very good at, and it was planning and scheduling. And then you can see my career. Then I went to transportation, I went to PLM. I did the entire thing in building and scaling software companies, to ultimately I was at one company that I looked around and I was like, it was harder and harder to do that building and scaling of organizations. And the ERP vendors like SAP and Oracle were doing it well. And I looked around the room and I was the most senior leader, and I still wanted to learn more from the best. And it was that I went to SAP. And it was like, Rosemary, I planned my career to do all these individual ones, right? Starting big, do all these individual ones, come full circle, to SAP where they handle them all. And that's what I do now. So it was, big, do all these little ones to prepare you to now do what you do at SAP, which is bring it up at a large global company.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So many of the women executives that we've talked to on the podcast have gone through a number of companies like this and learned each step of the way, so that now they have a total view of the landscape of supply chain, which sounds like what you did too.
Right.
And interestingly, I also came up through HP. I too was recruited out of grad school to go to work for HP. I was a regional logistics manager, and
Wow.
I know,
You had a real job, Rosemary. You had a real job.
yeah. So I think understanding the companies and manufacturing environment and being coached through some of these really great leadership companies like HP was very helpful in my career as well.
I still use some of the HP philosophy, the HP way. It really was, for a young person coming up, just such a phenomenal, and how they had us tour all their plants. We'd go to Boise. You went all over to understand each of the product lines, how they manufactured, and the importance of quality, and see people how they did it was such a great exposure to a young person.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic. I hope that the listeners all have opportunities to go through multiple wonderful companies like that as well. So I know that you are specifically interested in developing female talent in supply chain management. Can you tell us a little bit about the programs you have in place and what you're doing to support women coming up in the ranks in supply chain?
Well, it's my passion, Rosemary, so I would love to talk more about that. So when at SAP, diversity is considered extremely important, and they measure executives on your diversity. And in supply chain, it was not great. It was not great. And it wasn't okay to say, well, it's not great in the industry, and we're having trouble finding, recruits to come into it. So it was a self, um, I had to fix the problem for myself. And the way to do it was I had to get a pipeline of women in to coach, mentor, and develop. And in doing so, I realized that other folks had that. This is why I started at SAP Women in Supply Chain, to be for not only SAP, but our partners and our customers that all shared the same goal of improving the diversity of women in supply chain. Now, something big really helped kickstart this network. It's called COVID. And COVID gave the visibility to how important supply chain is, how it's now in the C-level, how what used to be the introverts in the boardroom now had a voice. So that in combination with saying it made supply chain not only important and strategic and had to be at the center of the company, it was kind of cool. So in starting this, and it has been such an awesome thing for me personally, but it was able to get women into the program, and it also then we were starting to look at folks that didn't necessarily have the experience, but they had the right DNA to go into it. So there are certain things. Are you quantitative, right? Are you a young person, right?
I just want to interrupt there because I think that's such an important point. People don't understand how quantitative supply chain is and how it's so closely aligned with accounting and cost accounting and a lot of heavy economic analysis and a lot of thoughtful
Yeah.
use of data. And I think that's such an important point. And the people that I've seen also most successful are interested in that, have kind of this analytic bent to their careers. Yeah, yeah.
And we went to finance, and there were a lot of folks in finance that had all that DNA, but they didn't particularly find finance exciting. And you bring them over. It also helps in supply chain if you have you're comfortable with technology, right? Because that's especially in the job now, it's, are you good with technology and do you embrace technology and all that? And the other thing supply chain people are is they are a can-do problem solver, will figure it out. So we look for that. But so we developed this organization, which has really grown. Quarterly, we do things virtually with a keynote speaker, and they're phenomenal. They've climbed Mount Everest. They're key on Wall Street. They're Harvard professors to kind of go over a theme. And then we have this panel of women in supply chain, and they're not just senior leaders, because we find different phases of your career, you have different issues. Early stage, middle stage, late stage. I'm late stage, I'm giving back right now. And that's where we have some really honest dialogue of these issues. That's what we're doing here. Now, in addition, SAP as an organization, non-supply chain, has probably one of the largest. It's the Business Women's Network, which is internal to SAP, which is cross-functional. It's global, but it's highly regional because they physically get together and do all sorts of programs. So it's both global and then regional, and the women really embrace it. And it's also what it ends up being is leadership experience for the women that are running it at the time, which they have a certain, I think it's a year, and it's extracurricular, so it's on top of their regular job, but it gives them a great leadership experience, great exposure, which is another thing. And then also there are several, I would say, from our HR that make sure we've got top women to watch. So we're helping them get on that first rung, which is, as we know from the McKinsey study, that first rung is hard for women leaders to get to. And then also we want to make sure we're not losing them. So SAP is very, very aware of working with women, recruiting women, but not only that, it's keeping them in role and promoting them, which
Yeah.
is a big challenge right now, Rosemary.
Yeah, for sure. Because there's we're at essentially full employment. It's hard to find talent to help you and staff your supply chains. And I also think women, and as you mentioned, coming up through your career, you're at different stages, you're at different levels of experience and so forth. And there is at some point where you cross over from the execution side, from actually doing the work, to strategy. So thinking more globally about what you should do, not just doing the day-to-day processing. And it's all part of the same continuum, but it's an important pivot point, I think, for senior leaders to start thinking about strategy instead of just simply doing the work operationally. So
And that sometimes is a hard transition.
yeah,
and takes a little bit to realize the difference as you move up. Yeah, good
Yeah,
point.
absolutely. Yeah, it's all part of the career development for sure. So, outside of SAP, you're also involved in helping supply chain women in outside organizations. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do a lot of mentoring, but in addition, what I do is I do a lot at colleges and universities in going to their supply chain classes, and I talk about supply chain careers. And then from that, then I develop a network and then make sure, and then I talk to them specifically about the jobs that are available, right? And then specifically how you could get a job at SAP, right? Because many times college students don't realize the broad jobs there are out there. I just recently had a group in our Hudson Yards office, and that was the point, to say, okay, these are all the people that are involved in supply chain that you don't realize. So depending on your interest and such and your lifestyle, and combine those, and I had different folks and reviewed with them their careers and how they ended up and how they were all in supply chain, and it just opened up their eyes. So I absolutely love doing that. And then I also work with the programs that are out there like CSCMP, and those programs as well whenever I can. Yeah, I've used, and I do that on a global basis. And right now, what I'm focused on is expanding what I've done in North America to the other regions, to Europe, to Asia, because actually the diversity in those issues is even worse than what we have in the North American market.
Yeah.
So we're working on that as well globally.
Yeah, interesting. I was listening to a presentation by Fareed Zakaria, the man that runs he's a CNN major anchor, and he has a program on Sunday mornings about global issues. And he was talking about women's roles that only in the last 40 years or so have women really come on the scene and provided comparatively higher level, higher ranking jobs and employment, and that it represents just a huge shift globally where women are recognized as truly part of the workplace. And so I was a little surprised about that. I'm thinking only 40 years, that's not very long. And when you consider how much has changed over that 40 years, it's really quite amazing to
It
see
is.
how far women have come. Yeah. And we have a long way to go as well.
I was going to add, we have a long way to go. Recently, SAP had a supply chain summit in Las Vegas, and a lot of my folks were on this panel. And all of a sudden, they looked, it was all men, and we were like, "Okay, stop, just stop. We are not." And it was actually interesting. It was the men that realized this is not happening. I am not going to be on a panel with four middle-aged men. Not happening. And we, the pad had just been assembled. It wasn't until they were all together that they realized this is a very bad thing. And I was so proud that they themselves realized this is bad. We need to fix it. And of course, you just have to look, and you will find they're out there, very talented women that deserved and were excellent on that panel. But we are getting that point where people realize it's not acceptable not to have diversity in whatever it is you're doing. It's key.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not that to the exclusion of men, but a recognition that women are equal, and capable, and in some cases really capable,
Really.
and understanding how you leverage that talent in the workplace. So, Darcy, what recommendations do you have for women and men in supply chain management, as they're trying to develop their own careers? What would you recommend they do and think about as they're sort of designing their own careers going forward?
Yeah. What I think is really important in supply chain, and you do see it, you do have to have that passion for the subject matter, right? You really have to like what it is and what it is doing. So first of all, because you can tell people in supply chain, they just love it. They just do. It's like a cult. And I think that's really important, is not look at it and go, oh, which are the hot. It's like really make sure you really like what it is, number one. Number two, know your craft. The devil is in the details of supply chain. So I really recommend folks understand it, right? Understand what it's doing, understand the algorithms, understand the technology and the importance, and really be better than everybody else. That's so do your homework and be very good. Be collaborative. That's an important part of supply chain. And find an area in it that you really do like and you excel at. The other thing is to just make sure that you have a voice, right? And a big thing about success in supply chain is if you can take complex material and make it simple, that is a huge skill set, because a lot of times, and we have this at SAP, we lose our audience sometimes when we start going on and on and on, and it's like, stop. Be able to explain what's going on in simple terms that your CEO can understand, because that's what they need to do. And I think that's a very important skill set of supply chain practitioners, to net it out in simple terms. That's just a couple of my advice.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. So thank you for joining us today, Darcy. It was so interesting to talk with you. Can you please give us your contact information if listeners want to learn more about SAP Digital Supply Chain or get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn at Darcy MacClaren, as well as you can always directly reach out to me at SAP, and it's darcy.mcclaren@sap.com. Either of those two ways, you will get me. And I would look forward to any contact, any questions you have about supply chain, women in supply chain, or SAP.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And you can listen to more Frictionless Supply Chain podcasts posted on Supply Chain Management Review's landing page, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can reach me, Rosemary Coates, at rcoates, RCOATES, at reshoringinstitute.org, and visit our website, www.reshoringinstitute.org, where we publish all of our research on manufacturing in America. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.